Hello again. In this video, I want to go through a few issues. The first is really this child trading model, where children are manufactured into long-term cash generative assets, and also the broader degeneracy of the institutions that govern us and the people who manage those institutions. I referred to this as the Epstein class, or it's not a term that I coined. It's been coined by others, but it is quite relevant. And it was quite funny this morning. I was looking at a sort of FT article where they picked up on this. I mean, the FT. It's quite a shame to see how that paper has been sort of degraded and almost made into a comic, which is sad when you consider its historic reputation. And they take this term, the Epstein class, and they said it's a sort of battle cry of the left or some nonsense like that. Whenever, populist battle cry, I think they call it. Whenever you see the term populist, you know that the journalism is exceptionally poor in whatever article uses the term, because it's a nonsense term. Populist is a derivative of population, and it's a meaningless term. It means that if something is popular, it's populist. But surely if something is popular, it's because people recognize it or they want to vote for it or whatever. But they have to turn it into something negative if it sort of challenges the narrative that these degenerative institutions want to propagate. So be aware of that. But in terms of our own, start with our own case with South Tyneside Council, how they, working with the family court, stole our younger daughter on the basis of falsified evidence facilitated by Rachel Hudson and so on and so forth, unsigned statements, unsigned letters. And but in terms of as we started to push on this, how they needed to destroy our younger daughter's emotional attachment to us, and that included, particularly on the mother's side, the Polish heritage. So they had to engage in this cultural genocide to make her into a long-term cash generative asset, because finance, anybody who studied finance will know that if you have an asset that is locked in for long-term contracted inflation protected government-backed cash flows, its value is significantly higher than if that asset or those cash flows could be interrupted at any time, such as the client, the child wanting to return home, or child who never wanted to return home. So they have to create this falsification to lock the child in to maximize the asset there. And when we challenged them on the Polish heritage, and we reminded our younger daughter that she's a Polish citizen, of which they've shown absolute contempt for, that is when we started to receive these threats, the latest wave of threats and intimidation. And we were away for a time. Ironically, in Poland, our younger daughter can't speak to her grandparents. That's see part of this cultural genocide. Prior I've said that all letters are censored now. Can't give a presents. Can't mention about Polish heritage. Real serious crimes against humanity by this rogue council and this deplorable trade in children. But it's actually a national thing. It's not just local. And whilst we're away, they have one of their care team meetings, as they call them, where they will just spout out all sorts of narratives, and it's very simple that if you raise anything that challenges this absurd and evil almost, I would say, quite satanic narrative. They will just ignore it and shout you down and say you can't attend and so on and so forth. And they played one of their tricks. This is how degenerate the system is. They played one of their tricks. I can't go to them because the reason they won't let me go to them because I challenged Deirdre Ryan in one of these the meetings about the coordinated coercion I received from her South Tyneside Council and the FCA, because we'd mapped this trade into children into this umbrella term of private assets, and I put it to her, and she looked very sheepish, didn't know what to do because there were other people on the call. It's recorded, she just put her head down and didn't say anything, didn't even deny it or anything like that, because she was quite sad. So they wouldn't let me go into that, and that's one of the reasons why, one of the many reasons why, via Northumbria Police, Rachel Hudson, for instance, called in a favour, which we now know we've drilled into some of this. And they came and used this pretext of harassment and vandalism to seize devices, because they wanted to check what research has been done and so on and so forth. As I've explained, I'll see very little, but that's why they did it. But in terms of the meeting when we were away, my wife was invited, but they played their usual trick. Their usual trick is, for instance, they'll send a Teams invite with the wrong time. So she logged on, there's nobody there, the meeting was before. So they can then try to say, oh, you didn't attend. It really is that degenerate. That is what happens when you have this degenerate class of people who are overseeing these institutions. I was, we were recently in Krakow, and it makes you think, actually, because, a lot of people go to Krakow, want to go to Auschwitz-Birkenau. There's clear reasons for that. I'm not sure many of them really understand fully what they're looking at. They go for different reasons. Some go for sentimental reasons. Some go for more shallow reasons, like anywhere, I suppose. But I always think that really what people should do as well is to go to the Schindler factory, because if you look at Auschwitz-Birkenau, there were people who went along and did terrible things because they will say, was told to do it, had no choice. A bit like at Welter, really, that obvious things were ignored and so on and so forth. Auschwitz is obviously a much, much higher level. It's not like for like, but the same trend. But with Schindler, it's very different there, and that's what people should think, because there was a person who could have gone along with what he was being pressured to do, but he found some sort of clever ruses to save lives, save the lives of a lot of Jewish people. And that is what people need to realise is if people go along with something, so your social workers, for instance, they'll be spoken to by their legal teams. The legal teams send them out to do the nasty work. They've got that deniability, that hands-off situation. And the social workers will say that I was told to do it because the legal team said to do it. Yeah. But really, the real brave people look at something and say, this is wrong. And like a Schindler, and they say, this is a really extreme, difficult situation, but I have to do something about it. And there are not many people who can do that. In terms of this child trading model, it does fit into this sort of private assets umbrella term. So, the fostering agencies are, as I've said on many videos, have been consolidated up by private equity. They want these long-term cash generative assets in the form of children. They want to make sure that those cash flows are not interrupted. And you have the private credit, as which is effectively institutions that are loaning money to these private equity companies. So that's the debt part of the capital structure of these private equity consolidation vehicles that are buying up care homes, fostering agencies, and so on and so forth. And then you've got the private equity, which is the equity part of the structure. And would you believe it? The private equity part sits in funds that are known as vintages, believe it or not, vintages. And they are effectively children who have been ripped from their families often with falsified evidence, gross corruption in the family court system, abuse of office, and they're sitting in these funds offshore where money is being harvested. This trend is being spread out. I've in other videos I've referred to little boy Streeting as a private equity fund man, with his previous role as heading up the NHS health secretary. Now you can see why he potentially wants to go above that, because he can oversee this effectively. What it is private equity want more and more of government-backed cash flows, and it's not just in the snatching of children. It's also in the NHS. So, if you can imagine someone like, it's not Street didn't start this. This started arguably as far back as the Conservatives before Blair. Blair supercharged it, and Cameron was okay with it. The Conservatives were happy to see it roll, and Labour again are supercharging it. They don't want. So if we take the NHS, for instance, they don't want to. It'd be quite suicidal for Labour to say that we're privatising the health service. So what they do, as others have done before them, is you effectively turn the NHS into a procurer of services, not a provider. And then you get private equity coming in, and they want to lock into those third estate taxpayer cash flows. If you want a recent example of this, look at the takeover of Spire Healthcare, for instance, where Spire Healthcare are taking on more and more NHS work. So that private equity comes in and snaps them up, and you take them off the market where you haven't got the same level of transparency and so on and so forth. You could never, for instance, going back to the child trading model, taking children from their parents, falsification of evidence, emotional sterilisation to make them into cash generative assets. You could never do that on the stock market. It has to be done in a private assets arena, because there isn't that level of transparency. That's why they need these trading venues like Pisces to be able to realise their value, because they can't take them to the stock market, because you would have too high a level of disclosure and people would start to ask questions. So that's why you see that. But in terms of this degenerative class that we live in, I mean, the examples are everywhere, and the abuse of children is everywhere. I mean, if you look, the Epstein situation, you've got the abuse of younger girls. You've got, now the royal family are heavily scandalised by it in terms of, Andrew's conduct or alleged conduct. I've shown you other videos and other videos before it came back into the press. There were some extremely serious incidents with the conduct of Sarah Ferguson and Andrew. We're invited to believe that the Queen, sorry, I don't recognise her title. I don't understand how a nation can be fixated with a degenerative institution like what we call the royal family. But we're invited to believe that Elizabeth knew nothing about it, Charles knew nothing about it. But of course, with Charles, nobody's really got to the bottom of the extent of how the taxpayer had to underwrite his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles when he was married to, before and during he was married to Diana. And even before the current degenerative figures or recently departed figures, you can go back to Edward VII, a scoundrel and philanderer, debaucherous person that he was, and his sort of antagonism towards Germany, if you like, at the start of the 20th century really did lay the path to World War One and the mass loss of life there. At least his mother understood the importance of Britain maintaining good relations with Germany. So had Victoria, for instance, lived another sort of 10 or so years, that war would have very unlikely to have happened. But Edward, sort of his antagonism and sort of lack of intelligence, lack of strategic understanding, sort of created the pathway to World War One. And you can see with Edward the Eighth, a sort of Nazi sympathiser. They go back to Henry the VIII, how invent a new church to facilitate theft and debauchery and horrendous abuse of women. It's rotten to the core. I really don't understand how people really revere it. It's quite extraordinary. But the abuse of children is very, very prevalent, unfortunately, at the moment. You see it. Gaza, for instance, the mass sort of abuse and death of children and suffering. You saw it with the American attack in Iran. I don't support the Iranian regime, clarify that. But, Tomahawk missile slams into a school and kills, 170 or something of innocent children. You've seen it recently in Ukraine attack. With Russian young Russian girls being killed. And if you say to me, Putin invaded Ukraine, illegal war, I would say yes, he did. He does bad things. Our leaders do very bad things. I don't support Putin. He doesn't need me to support him. He does do bad things and has done bad things. But you can see the trend of the suffering of children throughout this. So throughout history, throughout modern history, longer term, it's the institutions are completely degenerate. So the term the Epstein class in the modern context is quite relevant, but of course you could extend it further back and come up with a different term. But you can see as well when people start to challenge these lines of degenerative behaviour, institutions, states start to fracture. They start to fail, in essence, and you can see that through a lot of what we would call Western countries now. And the reaction to that is always the same. It's more censorship, it's more tyranny, it's more it's the removal of liberties, if you like. And you've seen that with, if you take the Unite the Kingdom rally, for instance, not something I would attend. It's not for me. I'm not interested in it, but there are many people who are, and they're entitled to be interested in it if they want to. But there was this, you saw how, Starmer, who is probably one of the most blunt, boring, awful, unintelligent politician you'll see anywhere, as I described him in the book Lost to the Race, is just a legal industry frontman, and he is that. He's essentially just the epitome of the tyrannous rule of lawyers that we find ourselves under, where more of our lives are run by judges and lawyers, not actually the people we vote for. He is the epitome of that. And you saw his reaction to it. He was again using this term far right. We don't have a free press in Britain. We don't have free speech, but a journalist could slaughter him if they had even an ounce of intelligence. They would say to him, Keir, what is far right? Describe it to me. Describe it to me in context of this political spectrum. And does that mean that far left is communism? Or what is far right? What is far left? What is the centre? He wouldn't have a clue how to answer those questions. That's why people are not allowed to ask him them. He's just using clipboard narrative, keep repeat. And what he's trying to do is in essence, they want to associate what they term this populism with, they call it right because they want to create a subconscious association with Hitler and things like that, which is, as I said before in other videos, it was immensely evil, almost in a class of its own. But that's what they're trying to do. And I say, go back, I've spoken about this before, go back to my childhood when it suited the far left was the bogeyman, because Thatcher was trying to break the unions associated with coal mine because they were holding the country to ransom. And she also had a sort of working relationship, shall we say, with Augusto Pinochet of Chile. He provided some support in the war in the Falkland Islands. He was a hardline military dictator, very anti-communist. So what we would call now, on this ridiculous scale, far right. But of course, then far right was all right, far left was not so good. But so you see how the whole thing gets all manipulated up. But it's the trend that you'll continue to see. Societies are fracturing; they're failing. People can see that; they can sense it. They know that the policies that they've been given are not the policies they voted for. They know that politicians are disingenuous. They lie. They cheat. They're the sophists. They're not interested in truth, virtue. They're the sophists. And the only way you can then quell that discontent is by more and more tyranny. So you'll see these patterns continuing. But this stain of degenerative behaviour is right through institutions. I'm not calling the people of Britain or America or anywhere else as degenerate. Of the institutions, and the people who run those institutions are completely degenerate. Strange enough, I received an email from Northumbria Police of a new investigator in my complaint. So I'll be going through that in another video, pulling that apart, explaining why they're doing that. But that's enough for now. Take care.